Yo guys, what is up? Sorry I have not been reading for a little while. I was not able to access the computer for long enough to record a reading video. So here I am. All of the other videos will be at the end of the video. So please keep watching till the end to see all the other videos so you can catch up on what has been happening and the only thing to fear. Now, it's been so long I do not remember what happened in chapter 4. So feel free to go back, listen to the 1 through 4, and now we're doing chapter. Oh, hold up. We're doing chapter 5, and my recommendation for this video is a book called The Boys Who Challenged Hitler. It is about some boys in Denmark. Denmark did surrender to Germany peacefully, kind of like Austria. And it's about some boys who rebelled. Eventually they got caught, so that's very sad because there's some very harsh things. But it's a really good book, and it'll touch your heart. It'll make you realize what we hold dear. What we hold dear is something that some people had to fight for, even as kids. Okay, so chapter 5. This is a pretty long chapter. Okay, so this is going to be a pretty long video, but that is A-okay. So, chapter 5. Once Zara spoke with Frau Schumann and finally finished her shift, she didn't have time to think about Bastian or her potential title as Eckhart housekeeper. When she arrived home at 7, the farm demanded all of her attention. The onions needed tilling, the horse neighed for food, and the gourds had developed a white-spotted blight that made her sigh, because they always fetched a good price in the fall. It would be a gourdless harvest this year. I do not know what gourds are. Oh wait, they're pumpkins. They're a type of pumpkin. With the moon rising in the darkening sky, Zara dragged her aching body to the house for a well-earned dinner. Inside the tiny kitchen, Miss Talley served a pan of fried onions and roasted pork, thanks to one of her patients who had paid her with a newly butchered sow. A sow is a pig. Zara dug in with gusto. She hadn't eaten pork since their Christmas ham. Wonder why it's so rare. Maybe because it's meat. I don't know. While Uncle Red fought to keep his eyes open. He had been working non-stop since morning, and the cuckoo clock in the living room now ticked towards 10 at night. I received a message today, Miss Talley said, dishing out the last bit of onions. A smile pricked her lips. An update from the Alliance. Zara stopped mid-chew. You did? From who? Garrison Strayer. As usual, Uncle Red frowned at the name. He had never warned to Garrison Strayer, one of Celia Farragott's right-hand man. There were over 50 rebels at the Alliance headquarters, each one assigned to oversee a handful of Alliance chapters. Garrison had been appointed to the Shinoda region 2 years ago, and Uncle Red had butted heads with him ever since. Garrison kept nudging Uncle Red to start up recruitments for Greenfield, while Uncle Red hemmed and hawed about staying cautious. Back and forth, back and forth. Zara had never met Garrison, but she liked him already. Someone had to stand up for her, stubborn as a mule, Uncle. Well, did Garrison stay? Uncle Red, said Uncle Red, his brows furrowed. I radioed him after we called off the supply run. He couldn't spare us any extra medical supplies, but he did give me a bit of good news. A twinkle shone in Miss Talley's gray eyes, making her appear 20 years younger. He asked me to share it with you. Zara put her fork down. Well, he has information about the Fuhrer's recent announcement. The Alliance discovered why Faust retired so suddenly. Miss Talley savored the news as if she were sipping a fine red wine. It turns out he was taking bribes from the Soviets. Impossible, said Uncle Red. You're joking. Rishmal Faust? Said Zara, choking out each word. Dieter's cousin? He betrayed the Hitler name for the Reds? I thought the very same thing, but Premier Volkov offered him a deal he couldn't refuse, said Miss Talley. If Faust kept the Soviets updated on the latest news in Berlin, they would appoint him commander of Western Europe once they conquered the Nazi Empire. It makes sense, doesn't it? Faust always wanted to take residence at the Berlin Palace, like his great-great-uncle Adolf. Zara swigged her glass of water while she processed the information. It was certain news that she didn't hear every day, much less every decade. Reginald Foss had been Dieter's loyal lapdog since they were teens. He was the last person she would think to become a turncoat, although his lust for power must have lured him from the Fuhrer's grasp. What happened to Foss after the Nazis found out? Zara asked. He was executed along with his wife and children. It was done very quietly, but the Führer knew that he had to explain his cousin's sudden absence, so he decided to give the announcement. Make a show out of the whole thing. Miss Talley looked at Uncle Red. You haven't said much, Redmond. I'm surprised, that's all. Uncle Red pushed his plate away. His thoughts were clearly somewhere else. The Soviets must be up to something if they were willing to take this gamble. That's what the Alliance believes, too. Farragut has contacts within Kremlin who have hinted that Premier Volkov wants to invade the borderlands, said Miss Talley, referring to the strip of European territory that divided the two empires. Those lands stretched from Estonia in the north down through Latvia and Lithuania and into Belarus and Ukraine. He'd break the non-aggression pact, said Zara. This news kept getting bigger and better. She couldn't help but grin at her uncle, although he kept his gaze on Miss Talley. It looked like her theory about the Reds stirring a war against the Fuhrer wasn't so far-fetched after all. Volkov hasn't been happy with the pact for years, Miss Talley said, so I wouldn't be surprised if he did just that. Do you know what this could mean for the Alliance? Said Zara. More theories burst through her. For years, the Alliance had only tackled small guerrilla attacks, nothing on a national scale after Mission Mesger had decimated their numbers. Perhaps now, with the non-aggression pact potentially breaking, the Alliance could rise up again. A thrill buzzed through her veins, but it was mingled with a sad ache. Zara looked at her chair where her mother used to sit, and wished her mom were here with them. She would have devoured this news like her favorite strawberry pie. It might not mean much. The Soviets are half a world away from us, Uncle Red said in his usual gruff manner. But the Nazis at war would be weakened, Miss Talley countered. She had long gotten used to his gruffness, and a weakened empire would be a plus for the Alliance. I agree, Zara chimed in. Miss Talley winked at Zara and gave Uncle Red a winning smile. It appears you have been outvoted. We'll leave you to the dishes while Zara and I play a round of rummy. Uncle Red pretended to grumble, but thanked Miss Talley for the meal. While he tackled the dinner pots, Zara and Miss Talley made it through 2 rounds of rummy and more conversation before Miss Talley's eyes drooped and she decided to call it a night. I'm turning into an old lady, Miss Talley said. The scent of her lavender perfume wafted into Zara's nose. A smell that had always calmed her. I'll have to get dentures soon, and a cane for this bad hip of mine. Oh, stop. You'll outlive us all, Zara said, giving her a quick hug. With a wave goodbye, Miss Talley headed to her cottage a mile away while Uncle Red decided to call it a night too, leaving half the dishes for tomorrow. But Zara couldn't sleep, not after hearing the news Miss Talley had shared during dinner. Her mind hummed while she tackled the last of the cooking pots. If the Alliance contacts were right, then the Nazis and Soviets would soon go to war. A clash like that would be monumental. It could usher in World War III, which would be very, very bad. Because even as a little background, this is modern day. That means nuclear weapons, which would basically destroy the entire world. Just giving you a heads up of what that would mean. And would certainly, so it would usher in World War III. And it would certainly boost the Alliance. With the Nazis busy on their eastern border, they would have to draw some of their territory-based troops for the fight. Fewer Nazis meant more chances at rebel-led riots, at rebellions. This was the sort of news that her mother had lived for. And this was why Zara needed to join the Alliance. She could never take the place of her mom, but she could try to fill her shoes the best she could. It was one small way to keep Annie St. James alive. A glint of gold caught Zara's eyes, and she realized Miss Talley had left her wedding ring on the counter. She must have taken it off to prepare the roast and forgotten all about it. Carefully, Zara picked up the band. It felt light as a penny in her hand. Narrowing her eyes, she read the worn inscription inside. To Nell, my bride. With love, Arthur. Mr. and Miss Talley had been married for 30 years when Mr. Talley was killed the same night as Zara's mom. Zara had only a few blurry memories of him, but she remembered how he would give her piggyback rides and tell her great tales of the American Revolution that her grandfather had passed on to him. Sometimes Uncle Red would join in the storytelling too. His voice would hit a crescendo when he spoke of Paul Revere's Midnight Ride. Zara would fall asleep dreaming of rebels and revolutionaries. These nights were some of the happiest in her childhood, along with the hot summer days when she and Molly would splash and swim in the Burns Pond. If only they could do that now. Zara's fist closed over the ring. Although she ached to climb into bed, she didn't want Miss Talley waking up in the morning and worrying about her missing wedding band. Slipping on one of her mother's old sweaters, Zara headed into the chilly night with the ring tucked snugly in her trouser pocket. The sky was as clear as glass, without a cloud for miles, and the crescent moon offered enough light for her to take a shortcut through the fields. On some nights, the Nazis sent out a patrol to roam the rural roads, and she didn't want to get stopped, especially if Sentinel Akin was the one doing the patrol. Zara yawned a half-dozen times while she trekked through the acres of farmland, but it wasn't long before she spotted Miss Talley's chimney in the distance. The Talleys had lived in a one-story house, quaint as a jukebox, since they had married. They even had hosted a few alliance meetings in their tiny basement, sometimes squeezing 50 or more members in there. But now most of those people were gone. Most of them were long dead. She was about to approach the back of the house when she heard the front door open, then close. She froze in the vegetable patch, feeling open and exposed, then a shadow hurrying toward the dirt road, dressed all in black. An alarm bell blared through Zara's head, thinking the house had been robbed. Then she noticed the shadow figure limping with every step. The gears cranked in her mind. It was Miss Talley, but where was she going at this hour? Zara was about to call out to her, but she hesitated. She asked Miss Talley where she was going. Miss Talley would only smile and walk Zara home. There was one conclusion. Miss Talley was up to something, and Zara wanted to know what it was. Rounding her shoulder, she slipped down the path after her friend, vanishing into the twinkling night. Zara crept alongside of the road, stepping on patches of crabgrass and dandelions to muffle her bootsteps. 40 yards ahead, Miss Talley shuffled toward the town, stopping every few minutes to massage her hip or squint behind her, making sure she wasn't being followed. What are you up to? Zara thought. Maybe Miss Talley was on her way to see a patient, but she was wearing a canvas rucksack instead of carrying her leather medical bag. Or maybe she was going to meet a potential alliance recruit, thought. Although Zara doubted that too. Miss Talley had been contacted by a potential recruit. She would have spoken to Uncle Red about it first. After all, a recruit could easily turn out to be a Nazi informant. Numerous alliance leaders had mistakenly trusted a German plant and gotten executed by the Sentinels for it. As they curved around the sleepy homes of Greenfield, Zara finally realized what her friend was doing. The road would soon lead them to Fort Goring, and to the medical supplies that her patients so desperately needed. Miss Talley was going on a supply run, alone. Up ahead, Miss Talley checked her pocket watch and hastened her pace, ducking into the thicket of trees that enveloped Fort Goring in a leafy embrace. Zara hurried behind her, but the forest canopy obscured the moonlight, and she quickly lost sight of her friend. Fear threaded through Zara's blood, something she hadn't expected. She wasn't scared of getting lost. She knew she'd find her way eventually. But she couldn't let Miss Talley tackle a mission on her own. On previous supply runs, Uncle Red was the only one who would sneak inside the fort, while Miss Talley would acted as a lookout, ready to toss a can of tear gas in case they needed a distraction for the guards. Miss Talley had never stolen the supplies on her own, and with her hip like that, Zara knew she had to find her. The bright lights of Fort Goring glared ahead, and she made her way toward them. The fort itself sprawled 50 acres and was enclosed by a 20-foot barbed wire fence. A constellation of buildings sat at the center of the acreage. The soldiers' barracks, the administrative structures, the hospital, and the prison. A wide swath of training fields lined the edge of the property where the soldiers would ruck march and the Anomaly Regiment would hone their superpowers. But now the fields lay empty as graveyards while the troops dozed in their bunks. Zara had never stepped inside Fort Goring, but she overheard enough conversations between her uncle and Miss Talley that would hopefully lead her in the right direction. Months ago, Miss Talley had mentioned a weak point in the fort's fence, right next to a trio of storage sheds not far from the abandoned hospital. With that memory guiding her, she skirted around the fort, branches clawing her forehead until she spotted a big block of building with boarded windows and a crumbling facade. A new hospital had been built over a year ago, leaving this one to be demolished. There it is, Zara thought, her heart pumping faster when she spotted three storage sheds not far ahead. But where was Miss Talley? Leaves rustled far to her left, and Zara clambered up an enormous oak tree, her heart chattering at the thought that if a soldier found her. But she balanced herself on a thick branch. She saw Miss Talley scurrying toward the fence, only 30 yards away. Miss Talley, Zara whispered, afraid to raise her voice any louder. For all she knew, one of the patrols could be strolling on the other side of those sheds. But Miss Talley didn't hear. Instead, the old woman lifted a rusted corner of the fence and wormed her head through it, followed by her shoulders. She had nearly slithered onto the other side when her hips got stuck in the narrow passage. Zara swore. She was ready to jump from the branch and pull Miss Talley out of trouble. But the slightest movement caught her eye, forcing her to pause. Then she swore again. A security camera sat at the corner of the roof shed, its digital eye sweeping across the fort. Zara didn't remember her uncle mentioning the camera before, not along the fence. There were security devices installed at the fort's entrance, but the perimeters hadn't been guarded as well, probably because Colonel Eckhart focused his budget on new toys like weapons upgrades and new tanks. Maybe the capital sent in more security supplies. Whatever the reason, the camera was about to catch Miss Talley red-handed. The bulky device turned in Miss Talley's direction, swiveling its neck toward her as she struggled to pull herself free. Every hair on Zara's arms pricked up. She gauged the distance from the tree and the fence. By the time she reached Miss Talley, it would be too late. She stared at her hands, and the potential swirling through them. No one can ever know, her uncle's voice echoed. But she couldn't lose Miss Talley. That wasn't even an option. Without another thought, Zara thrust her hands toward the camera, palms up. Listen to me, she called out in her mind. A breeze tickled beneath her fingers, drifting sleepily around her wrists. Months had passed since Zara had manipulated the air, and she could feel how rusty she'd gotten. Come on, faster! She thrust all of her focus at the security camera, her uncle's caution shoved aside. An ache throbs in her temples, like it always did when she let her powers go fallow. But the breeze gathered strength. Leaves shivered and branches groaned as the wind whistled around her body. She didn't know if it was enough, but she was running out of time. Release! The wind obeyed, eager for her commands. In a great whoosh, it pummeled forward and rammed against the camera, stalling its progress. Finally, Miss Talley slid through the fence and rolled into the shed's shadow, safe for now. Zara collapsed against the tree trunk, panting. That had been too close, really. Miss Talley scurried from shadow to shadow, like a mouse scurrying for crumbs, until she reached a cinder block storage facility. She took a lockpick from her pocket and grasped the sturdy metal lock, fumbling with both before the door cracked open and she stumbled inside. Zara wondered if she should follow after her to make sure everything went smoothly. But she spotted that camera again. The Nazis could never know that Miss Talley would hear. There couldn't be any evidence. With one hand turned up, she silently called for the wind, once again beckoning it to her side. A thrill buzzed through her. She hadn't done this since Christmas, when a snowstorm swallowed the Shinoda Hills, and Zara had used the wind to carry her a few acres to locate their lost milking cow. Uncle Red had been livid when she came home. You weren't far from the road, he had shouted while her boots soiled the floorboards with melted snow. What were you thinking? Zara had been thinking about that the cow was worth over 200 Reichsmarks and how they could never afford that sum again. Besides, she had been careful. The heavy snow had obscured her from view. Otherwise, she would never have gone after the animal. Still, she apologized and promised Uncle Red she wouldn't use her power again. And she had kept that promise. Until tonight. Glancing at her palm, Zara focused on the air right above it. Her temples pulsed. She ignored the pain and focused on one thought. Spin. A miniature tornado tore across her skin. Zara's urging, it grew an inch taller, then another, until the tiny wind funnel reached half a foot. She aimed it toward the device. Destroy! she thought. The tornado zipped toward its victim and battered against the machine until the lens cracked, sending shards of glass flying. Right. A smile sending shards of glass flying. A smile tugged at Zara's lips, but she knew Miss Talley wasn't out of trouble yet. Zara leaned against the trunk again, finally letting her heartbeat catch its breath while she waited for Miss Talley to reappear. Her gaze roamed over Fort Goring, from the old hospital to the shiny new one, from the prison to the countless training fields, searching for any sign of the guards, but the fort was quiet that night. Far to the right of her she noticed a big cluster of apartment buildings. The soldiers' barracks, one of the barracks appeared newer than the rest, and its walls had been painted with 3 bolts of lightning. The anomaly division. Don't like them. For a split second, Zara envied them. The sentinels had never had to conceal their powers, to hide what they truly were. Instead, once their abilities manifested as children, they were deemed prized in the eyes of the Empire, and sent to special schools to hone their skills. A shudder snuck down her spine. The threat of Nuremberg laws had been hanging over her head for years. The thought of being caught by the Nazis still made her throat tighten with fear. That was why Uncle Red had forbidden Zara to use her power. No one can ever know, he told her again and again. It's for your safety. Do you understand? And for the most part, she listened to him. Zara had been 7 when she had first manifested, only a few days after her mother's death. The grief had welled inside her like a plugged-up drain, swirling and swirling until the air in her bedroom formed a miniature windstorm. Furniture splintered. Picture frames fell. Uncle Red had to douse her with cold water to calm her before he wrapped her in a tight hug, telling her that she was going to be all right. But she saw the fear in his eyes. It had taken Zara's months to control her new ability. Uncle Red had to pull her out of primary schools multiple times, citing grief over her mother's death. He had told the teachers that Annie St. James had died from dysentery, a lie to cover up her ties to the Alliance. And fortunately, they had believed her. After all, the death of a clean bottom was hardly interested them. And dysentery is when, like, you don't have any, there's not many clean clothes or anything. Like, the bathrooms aren't clean. That kind of experience, which I would hate. Zara studied her hands with a sigh. She felt so free whenever she used her power, the wind whipping around her, the air carrying her high above the trees. In moments like those, she could almost forget the heavy shadow of the Nazi rule. Almost. But the Nazis were never far from her thoughts. She wasn't only a Christmas. She was an anomaly deviant, thanks to the American blood flowing through her. A freak, to be destroyed. She closed her fists tight. Her abilities were accursed. If she had never manifested them, her uncle wouldn't have to worry so much about her, and they wouldn't be forced to keep this secret locked inside of them. The only person who knew it was Miss Talley. Even Molly had been kept in the dark. Uncle Red had made Zara promise not to say a word. Still, Zara's power had become a part of her. It was the only useful thing her father had left her, after all. He wasn't an anomaly himself, but he had told Zara's mom that his grandfather had served in the Ronin elite, a mind reader, apparently. On lonely nights, Zara wondered if she should look up her father on an academy computer. She could have a whole other family out there, but she always snuffed out these thoughts in the morning. By the morning, her father would never acknowledge a half-American child like her. She was probably nothing but a mistake to him, the product of an affair he'd had, probably forgotten about years ago. Zara pushed aside the ache blooming inside her. She had Miss Talley and Uncle Red, and they were enough. Despite everything they had gone through, from Mission Metzger to the Nazi interrogations, they'd never left Zara, and she loved them for it, although she probably should tell them that more often. A sheet of clouds swung over the moon, cutting Zara's visibility in half. She scooted forward on the branch to get a better view of the storage facility, but a sharp piece of bark cut open her thumb. Nice one, Zara muttered. Yet another cut to add to the wounds and bruises she had collected on the farm. She tried to ignore the pulsing pain, but this one felt different, like tiny needles stabbing through her veins. Zara sat up. She had felt the strange stinging before. It had happened 2 months ago when she sliced her toe on a stray piece of glass. But it hadn't gotten infected, so she shrugged it off. This had to be an odd coincidence or a strange medical condition, and she really hoped it was the former. The local hospital only treated Germans, and she couldn't afford the fees anyway. The storage room swung open. Zara promptly shoved her injured thumb from her thoughts. She watched Miss Talley tiptoe out of the building with a full rucksack over her shoulder. She hobbled toward the fence, slipping the bag underneath it first before she scooted herself under. Hidden in the leaves, Zara's heart sank, but she couldn't celebrate until Miss Talley made it home safely. She waited a long minute before she climbed down the trunk and headed for the Talleys' home. As she wove out of the forest, the tree boughs scraped against her cheeks, but a smile remained stitched on Zara's lips because of what she had done. She had completed her very first mission. She had proved her uncle wrong. So that is the end of Chapter 5, and Chapter 6 will probably be coming up pretty soon. And this was a really long video. I apologize. I honestly, if I'd known that it was going to be this long, I probably would have split it. But also that's really annoying because then, I mean, you'd have to return, wouldn't you? And you don't want to return. You want to know the whole thing. So I get that. So that is about it. Make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Let's see if we can get to 10 likes. If we get any views. If any of you bothered to listen this long. And yeah, I will see you later.